Short arms. Having shorter arms in boxing provides a clear advantage. At close range, shorter punches travel less distance and arrive faster. A shorter arm concentrates mass closer to the shoulder. Punches rotate faster, return faster, and can be thrown repeatedly without long recovery. In tight exchanges, small timing differences decide who lands first. This advantage matters most when a fighter is willing to stay at close range. Short arms become a weapon once distance is collapsed, and Mike Tyson built his entire style around that idea. Tyson forced fights inward from the opening bell. Against Trevor Berbick, he slipped under the jab, stepped into range, and stayed close enough that Berbick couldn't fully extend his punches. From that compressed distance, Tyson's hooks and uppercuts came off short rotations, thrown from tight angles with no windup. The punches landed before Berbick could reset or counter, not because of reach, but because shorter arms let Tyson rotate, recover, and fire again faster than a longer-armed opponent could react. Shorter arms are also better for throwing combos. Isaac Cruz showed this against Gervonta Davis. On paper, Davis held a clear reach advantage, 67 inches to Cruz's 63, a gap of more than 4 inches. Cruz made that advantage irrelevant by never allowing the fight to live there. He stepped in behind a high guard, crowded Davis's chest and shoulders, and removed the space required for long arms to fully extend. Once the fight was forced inside, it came down to who was set and who could fire first. Flat nose. A flatter nose in boxing reduces the risk of swelling or damage blocking airflow, making it easier to keep breathing during a fight. Jabs land round after round. Heads clash. When swelling closes the nasal passage, fighters are forced to mouth breathe, which accelerates fatigue and limits recovery between rounds. Mike Tyson also benefits from this. Against James "Quick" Tillis in 1986, Tyson spent long stretches slipping inside, clinching, and trading at close range over 10 rounds. Despite repeated contact and head positioning inside, his breathing never visibly deteriorated, allowing him to maintain pressure late in the fight, rather than backing off to recover. Another great example of this is Miguel Cotto. Cotto had surgery to repair nasal damage. In the rematch, he maintained steadier breathing and avoided the late fight fade seen in their first meeting. Big hands. Having large hands in boxing increases the effective weight behind a punch. When contact is made, more mass arrives at the target. Punching damage isn't only about speed. The mass at the end of the arm matters. Larger hands usually mean thicker knuckles and heavier fists, which transfer more force on impact. Two punches can look similar on film, but the heavier fist produces a more powerful punch. Hand size also affects durability. Thicker bones and wider knuckles are less likely to break. Fighters who trust their hands are more willing to throw hard shots without hesitation, so they can commit to more power punches. George Foreman showed this against Joe Frazier in 1973, when he dropped Frazier 6 times in 2 rounds. Many of the knockdowns came from short punches and partially blocked shots. Even when Frazier got his gloves up, the impact displaced him and broke his balance, rather than stopping cleanly on the guard. Sonny Liston's jab had the same effect. Against Floyd Patterson in 1959, Liston repeatedly snapped Patterson's head back with the jab alone. Patterson struggled to step inside because even blocked jabs disrupted his stance. Larger hands can also make punches heavier, even when contact isn't perfect. Against Dominic Breazeale in 2019, Deontay Wilder knocked him out with a right hand that landed high on the head rather than cleanly on the chin. The punch made partial contact, but the weight behind it ended the fight immediately. Long wingspan. A long wingspan provides a reach advantage, letting punches land from farther out than opponents expect. A longer reach forces opponents to step closer before they can punch, which gives the longer fighter more time to respond. Thomas Hearns built his offense around that gap. Against Luis Ortiz in their first fight, Deontay Wilder's right hand landed from outside Ortiz's perceived range as Ortiz stepped in behind a jab during the 10th round, ending the fight in a knockout. A long wingspan doesn't just help at long range, it can also shut down forward pressure without retreating. Lennox Lewis used his reach that way against David Tua in 2000. Rather than giving ground, Lewis kept his feet planted near center ring and repeatedly caught Tua with jabs as Tua stepped inside. Each entry was met by contact before Tua's hooks could fire. Tua rarely reached Lewis cleanly because the distance was being closed on Lewis's terms, not his own. Wide shoulders. Wide shoulders mainly affect how a fighter carries their upper body. They create a broader frame that can feel more stable during punching and movement. Over rounds, that stability can help a fighter stay balanced and reset position more easily after throwing punches. George Foreman showed this against Ken Norton in 1974. Foreman stayed square and planted while throwing wide, forceful punches. Even when Norton blocked or partially deflected shots, Foreman remained balanced and immediately followed with the next punch. Norton was knocked down repeatedly, without Foreman ever needing to reset his feet. Wide shoulders also gave Sonny Liston a punishing jab. Against Cleveland Williams in 1966, Liston drove the jab from a stable base, keeping his shoulders level and his weight centered. Williams was knocked down early and repeatedly struggled to step inside because each jab disrupted his balance. At lighter weights, the advantage also shows up. Against Gennady Golovkin in their first fight in 2017, Canelo Alvarez absorbed shots on his shoulders, stayed compact, and fired counters without drifting out of position. Even when pressured, his stance held, allowing him to punch and defend without losing balance. Narrow hips. Narrow hips affect how quickly a fighter can rotate and change direction. Less mass at the hip joint allows faster weight transfer and cleaner transitions between offense and defense. Direction changes, pivots, and angle shifts require less effort when rotation is compact. The hips turn, the feet follow, and balance stays centered instead of dragging behind the motion. Against Emmanuel Rodriguez in 2019, Inoue dropped him with a short right hand thrown during a quick hip turn. The punch traveled a compact path, but the guard fully set. Over long fights, narrow hips also help. Alexander Usyk relied on that against Murat Gassiev in 2018. Usyk circled continuously, pivoted off exchanges, and reset his stance after combinations without slowing. As the fight progressed, Gassiev's movement diminished, while Usyk continued turning and stepping at the same pace through 12 rounds. Thick neck. A thick neck reduces head movement on impact, lowering the risk of being stunned or dropped. When punches connect, damage comes less from contact itself and more from how violently the head snaps back. A stronger neck stabilizes the head, keeping it closer to center and reducing rotational force. Over rounds, that difference shows up. Dimitri Bivol is a good example. Against Canelo Alvarez in 2022, because he stayed upright, Canelo was unable to build follow-up offense after single clean shots. A strong neck is a big advantage in fights that go the distance. Against Riddick Bowe in their first fight in 1992, Evander Holyfield absorbed sustained headshots during long exchanges without collapsing or losing coordination. Even late in the fight, his head movement remained controlled, allowing him to continue trading. Neck thickness also matters when absorbing shots to enter range. Against Razor Ruddock in their first fight in 1991, Mike Tyson absorbed clean left hooks while stepping forward. His head shifted but did not snap back, allowing him to stay upright, keep advancing, and fire back immediately instead of backing off. Big head. A big head sounds like a joke advantage, but in boxing it affects how damage is absorbed. The head is the main target, and when it's physically larger, incoming force tends to spread out more instead of concentrating on a single point. That doesn't mean punches don't hurt, but it can reduce how sharply the shock hits the brain on borderline shots. There's also a balance element to it. A larger head usually comes with a thicker skull and more mass up top, which can make the head more protected. This helps boxers stay under control after taking clean punches. Andy Ruiz Jr. showed this early against Anthony Joshua in their first fight in 2019. Joshua landed clean right hands in the opening rounds, but Ruiz stayed upright and balanced after impact. It happened throughout Gennady Golovkin's career. Against Canelo Alvarez in their first fight in 2017, Golovkin absorbed repeated clean power shots without falling back. His head movement remained controlled, allowing him to keep stepping forward and throwing without breaking stance. Joe Frazier is another example. Against Muhammad Ali in their first fight in 1971, Frazier kept getting hit while continuing to close distance. His head shifted under impact but stayed stable enough for him to keep advancing, setting up the left hook knockdown in the 15th round. Dense bones. Dense bones provide a durability advantage in boxing. This matters most for pressure fighters. When the hands and arms hold up over rounds, output stays steady instead of dropping as damage accumulates. Julio Cesar Chavez showed this in fights built on volume. Against Meldrick Taylor in 1990, Chavez punched steadily into a high guard for 11 rounds. Taylor blocked many shots, but Chavez's output stayed constant as Taylor's pace deteriorated, leading to a late stoppage through accumulation rather than a single clean strike. The Antonio Margarito case is an extreme version of this. In his first fight with Miguel Cotto in 2008, illegally hardened wraps created the same effect as super dense bones. Every punch caused extra damage, not just the clean shots. He got away with it that time, but in his next fight, inspectors noticed abnormal padding in his hand wraps that hardened once wet. His license was revoked, he was suspended, and his reputation never recovered. Bulky torso. A bulky torso affects how a fighter absorbs force and stays upright under pressure. The chest, back, and core stabilize the body when punches land and keep the connection between the legs and hands intact during exchanges. This shows up most clearly with body shots. Fighters with more mass through the torso tend to absorb impact without folding. Posture stays upright, the guard remains in place, and balance is preserved. Gennady Golovkin showed this against Daniel Jacobs in 2017. Jacobs landed clean head and body shots across 12 rounds, including extended exchanges in the middle rounds. Golovkin's posture remained upright after impact, allowing him to continue stepping forward and throwing without resetting his stance or backing off. Sean Porter had the same advantage against Errol Spence Jr. in 2019. Porter absorbed body shots and shoulder contact while leaning, clinching, and fighting at close range. Even after taking clean shots inside, his torso stayed stable enough for him to remain balanced and continue pressing rather than being pushed backward. Another example is Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Joseph Parker in 2018. When Parker landed clean shots during trades, Ruiz stayed planted and upright, immediately returning fire without losing position. His torso absorbed the impact without forcing a reset, keeping the exchange active. Fast twitch dominance. Fast twitch muscle fibers fire quickly and generate force without delay. In boxing, that allows punches to be thrown with little setup and delivered before opponents finish reacting. This shows up most clearly in timing. Fighters with fast twitch dominance can punch during brief openings. Movements start and finish quickly, leaving little visual cue. That advantage defined Roy Jones Jr. at his peak. Against James Toney in 1994, Jones threw lead hooks and straight shots while moving laterally or pulling back, often with his hands low. Toney reacted after the punches landed because the shots were launched during transitions, not after a visible setup. Speed also helps a ton when countering. Against Errol Spence Jr. in 2023, Terrence Crawford caught Spence repeatedly as Spence stepped forward behind his jab. The counters came immediately after the read, without loading or resetting stance, dropping Spence multiple times before he could recover position. In combinations, the effect becomes overwhelming. Against Ricky Hatton in 2009, each punch carried snap despite the speed, producing knockdowns from sequences that unfolded faster than Hatton could adjust. Thick wrists. Thick wrists play a quiet but important role in boxing. The wrist is the final link between the arm and the fist, and when that link is stable, force transfers more cleanly into the target. Less energy is lost through bending or misalignment, and punches land with more authority. That stability also affects durability. Fighters with solid wrists can keep throwing hard without worrying as much about injury. When punches collide with elbows, gloves, or skulls, weaker wrists begin to ache or swell. Strong wrists allow commitment to stay high late into fights. This trait was central to Roberto Duran's inside game. His hooks were short and heavy, landing square again and again. His wrists didn't buckle or glance off awkwardly, which is why his punches carried authority even against larger opponents. Thick wrists also help in other fights dominated by close-range contact. Arturo Gatti's fights turned into wars, full of messy exchanges and tons of inside fighting. Being able to keep throwing without his hands giving out allowed him to stay dangerous deep into those fights.